There's so much interest.
I
Thank you all for joining
know.
us. Yeah.
And that is Dr. Kathleen Treseder right there from UCI. Welcome her.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
All right, and I think we can get started here because we are full. Go ahead. We also have here on site Elisa Renas, our restoration manager with NBC, and David Vanuelis, our NBC restoration intern and PhD student at UCI.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is, welcome to the Big Canyon Kickoff webinar. We are live here. Elisa Renas, and this is David Vanuelis. We're your restoration team with the Newport Bay Conservancy. So real quickly, we'll do a little introduction on the Newport Bay Conservancy, who we are, kind of orient you to where we're at. And then I'll pass it over to David, who will introduce himself, his lab, and the research he's doing here and how it ties into the project. And then David will pass the mic to Karen with Squirt. So real quickly, for those of you who are not familiar, we are the Newport Bay Conservancy. We've been around for over 50 years, and we exist to preserve and protect the Upper Newport Bay, or the Newport Bay. And we do that through restoration, education, research, and advocacy. And so today we're here for a little bit of the maybe education. Hopefully we drop some knowledge on you, the restoration, and a little bit of research arm of our organization. And so we are a small team, and we do heavily rely on our partners. And we could not do this project without the help of the different landowners in the Bay, as well as the different people that are part of our technical advisory committee, so our TAC. Some people that have contributed financially to make this project possible include these people on this side here. So the California Ocean Protection Council, CDFW. We have the City of Newport Beach, the State Coastal Conservancy, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and David's lab has made this possible. So I'm going to pass it over to David.
Awesome. Well, I'm a second-year PhD student. I'm in the Treseder Lab, and at the Treseder Lab, what we're trying to do is to study fungi and fungal organisms to help us predict climate change. And here at the Big Canyon, we have a huge infestation of this really bad tree called the Brazilian pepper tree. And it's actually from Brazil, and it's not native here. And it actually outcrowds all of our native vegetation and our native willows, our native elderberry, native coyote brush. This pepper tree grows like wildfire, and it takes over everything. So today we're going to show you some of the pepper trees on site here at the Big Canyon Nature Park. And we're going to tell you why we want to remove these trees, what are some of the benefits we get for the habitat, and we also want to tell you about why the Brazilian pepper tree is so abundant here. And it also has to do with this thing called mycorrhizal fungi. And mycorrhizal fungi are fungal organisms that live in the inner spaces of the root cells in any tree. And for the Brazilian pepper tree, it uses like a specific type of mycorrhiza, which helps it outcompete all of our native plants. So at the Treseder Lab, we're going to be working with this restoration project to hopefully tell you how the microbes lead to the infestation and how our restoration efforts and removing these trees help restore not only the native plant ecosystem, but also the native microbiome, which includes the mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria. So we're really excited to be here today, and we're ready to give it off to Karen.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen here. Okay. Can everybody see that? All right, I see a thumbs up from Kathleen. Excellent. So my name is Karen McLaughlin. I work for the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project, which is a public agency whose mission is to provide science for water quality management in the region. So the Big Canyon team invited me here today to try to put this project into a slightly larger context by talking a little bit about the Newport Bay, which is the receiving water for Big Canyon. Newport Bay is one of Southern California's few remaining estuaries and salt marsh habitats. And these are an incredibly important resource for biodiversity. They support commercial and recreational fisheries. They're important for migratory birds. In fact, Newport Bay is on the list of stopovers for the Pacific Flyway. They're home to a number of endangered species, and they provide recreational opportunities for our local communities. But these estuaries are at risk not only from the global threats of climate change, like rising sea levels, higher temperatures, and acidification, but also local impacts from things like habitat loss and fragmentation, as well as contaminant loading from urbanized watersheds. So part of what my agency does is try to figure out what these water quality issues are and how they're impacting the system. And if you study environmental issues or you've been paying attention, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the number of issues affecting any one system. So you probably all felt this way. It feels like a very big job and it's a little bit daunting. But one of the messages I want to leave you guys with is that your actions and our local actions have a significant impact on the health of our coastal ecosystems. And I could have thrown a bunch of science out here to show it to you, put up a whole bunch of figures and prove to you that this is true. But in this case, I thought a picture was worth 1,000 words. So I want you to look on the left-hand side. This was Upper Newport Bay in 1996 before nutrient management. So nutrients would wash down from the watershed and they would create these huge algal mats, like laying like a carpet on the mudflats. And that thick mat of algae prevented the birds from getting down into the mudflat to get the things that they needed to eat. The things that were underneath the mudflat got suffocated. The water would rush up onto the mudflats during high tide and wash it into the water. It would decompose and it would pull the oxygen out of the water. It would kill the fish and squeeze their habitat. So by the late 90s, the state of California said, enough, we've had enough. We want to fix this system. So they decided to start to implement regulatory actions. So they rewrote the permits for the nurseries and other agriculture, encouraging them to use recycled water and limit the nutrients they put into the system. They worked with Caltrans as a partner to develop a dewatering system that pulled the nutrient-rich waters to the sewers instead of the creek. And they worked with Irvine Ranch Water District to pipe the water out of the San Diego Creek through the wetland complex that's right across from UCI to help use the power of wetlands to denitrify the water and take the nutrients out. And you can see that 20 years later, in 2014, after that nutrient management, those mudflats are pretty clear of that macroalgae. So again, actions have significant impact. So the point here that I want you guys to remember is that when we act holistically and try to manage a system from the watershed to the receiving waters, we can have a big impact. And in this case, we didn't just relieve the nutrient eutrophication issue by getting rid of some of that algae. We also were able to take care of a number of other problems. So the wetlands also pull out pathogens, they pull out contaminants, which help us focus on some of these bigger problems that we can start working on mitigation strategies for the bay. Okay, so restoration of the land improves water quality, and that's bringing us back to where we're at today for this kickoff for this big restoration project in Big Canyon. So to kick that off, I'd like to introduce to you Kathleen Treseder, the Howard A. Schneiderman Endowed Chair at UCI. She's going to talk to you a little bit about this project and focus on her work where she's studying the role of fungi in ecosystems, which has illuminated their importance for restoration projects like this one, as well as their impact on global issues such as climate change. So Kathleen, take it over.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. McLaughlin. I really appreciate that. I've known Dr. McLaughlin for, I think, like 15 years now, and I've always been really excited to hear about the science she's been doing. I think that just even that picture highlights how, yeah, even just a few really thoughtful, evidence-based decisions can really fundamentally improve our environment. And so I'm excited about that. And so we're going to try to keep that theme going for today. Let's see, is this visible okay for everybody? Oh wait, I need to share a second. Here we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see this?
You want it. Perfect. Thank you.
I'm so excited. Okay, so I'm going to keep this going and try to talk about how we're using science and evidence to manage the soils in this watershed to help restore the ecosystems, which will ultimately affect the health of the bay. All right, now as Karen was saying, you know, things that people are doing upstream of the bay can really influence the bay. And so when you think about it, so here's a picture of the Back Bay. You can see all those homes there along the cliffs. And so as they are adding fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, and so forth to their lawns, and really anybody on this watershed, as they're doing that, after the rains come, they will wash those chemicals down toward the bay. Now, they don't go straight into the bay though, in most cases. In most cases, they get filtered to some extent through the soil. Right? And the soil actually can play a big role in cleaning up that water before it gets to the bay. Everything here, everything you see in this picture is connected. And there are connections even beyond that. Karen was talking about how we have migratory birds that come from all over the world and use this bay. So all of the work that we're doing in every component of this ecosystem has far-reaching effects.
And then Dr. Treseder, would you try to unrecord or share your screen again, exit out of it? We have two of our participants saying that they can't see the screen. That would be great.
Okay.
So we're going to try it one more time.
Let's try this. How about that?
Okay, can I have one of the participants give me a yes or no if they're seeing the screen now?
Thank you for speaking up.
All right, they can see it.
Okay, second time is pretty good. It looks pretty good. Okay, let me know if there's any further problems. Okay, so this water is going through the soil. Soil is so important. It is something that we don't often think about, but we really should. Soil is life. It's not just a place for plants to live, which is important, but it is in itself a living thing. All right, so there are lots of things that live in the soil. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but when we started the quarantine, I started a sourdough culture starter. All right, and I was never into it before the quarantine, but I've really gained an appreciation for this. In fact, I think of it as one of the pets in our house. It even has a name. It's called Anstel Irise. And you can see, like, as I started working with it, you can see that it has, there's a lot that it does. Like, it breathes. You can see it bubbles that it makes as we activate it. You can see when we add it to the flower, you can watch it happen. You can watch it transform that flower. All right. All the microbes that are in the sourdough starter that I have and that you may have, there are similar microbes in the soil that are doing similar things. All right, all the things that you can watch in your sourdough starter are happening in the soil as well. All right, soil is living. Okay, let's see if I can get, okay. How many species are living in the soil? Well, we know that if you take a handful of soil and you were to count the number of species in that handful, you would get thousands of species. The soil is a highly, highly diverse thing. What kind of species do we get? Well, we get insects, and you've probably seen these if you're gardening. We have ants, we have worms, we have other things like springtails, and and I think of these insects as the engineers for the soil. They can pull things in. They shred wood and dead leaves. They create tunnels. They put this larger structure in the soil. And then we have bacteria. And bacteria I think of as the recyclers of the soil. So they can take nutrients that other organisms have used and discarded and transform them into forms that organisms can use again. And they don't do this on purpose to help other organisms. They're just doing it for their own reasons. But in the process, they do recycle nutrients. And then we also have fungi. Right? And fungi are what I study and I love. And so here's a picture of a fungus, and this is the mushroom of a fungus. Now, I'm always excited to see mushrooms of fungi. I don't know about you, but one thing to think about is that the mushrooms are actually only a small part of the fungus. they're the reproductive structure. They're kind of like the apples of an apple tree. When you see a mushroom, you can be sure that there is a lot of fungal material in the soil that you don't see that is making that mushroom. And fungi in general, I think of as the web of the soil. They physically connect a lot of different organisms, and they also hold that soil in place. Okay, and together, all these organisms in the soil act as service providers. All right, they're doing their own thing for their own reasons, but in the process, one of the very great side effects is that they are really helping us out and helping out many of the other species in the ecosystem. Right, they're going to help keep the water clean, support plants, and other things. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the services that they do that we really care about. Okay, now there's one type of mycorrhizal fungus that seems like it's very important in providing services that we value. And this is called mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, so mycorrhizal, that's kind of a new word probably for many people. It simply means, myco means fungus and rhizal means root. So it's a fungus that lives on plant roots. Okay. Most plants in the world, when you walk around in your garden, in your house plants, out in open spaces, most plants have mycorrhizal fungi on them. And a lot of these plants can't live without them. So what these fungi do is they grow through the soil, and when they encounter a plant root, they'll attach onto it and sometimes even grow inside of it. All right, so I'm going to show you this picture here. This is a pine seedling. And see all the things that are masked out with red? Those are the actual roots of the pine seedling, okay? Those are the roots. All the other material that you see there, all that web-like material, that's the fungus, okay? So the fungus is growing out through the soil. What it's doing as it grows through the soil is it mines the soil for nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus and other things. It pulls those nutrients out of the soil and it passes some of them onto the plant. So they're basically like fertilizing the plant naturally. Now, they don't do this for free. The plant pays the fungi with food. So the plant feeds the fungus, and the plant feeds the fungus sugars that helps the fungus grow, just like we feed our yeast sugars, okay? So this ends up being a beneficial relationship for both parties. Now, in the process, these fungi can help us in other ways. They can help, for instance, make sure that we have clean water in the bay, okay? And I'll tell you how. One is that they help prevent soil erosion. So one of the ways that the water can become muddy or murky or sediment loaded is if we have soil particles being washed into the bay with water. Now these fungi, what they'll do is they grow through the soil and form this web, and they essentially hold these soil particles in place. So what you're seeing here is these two column-like structures are plant roots. Those are fine roots. And then all those little silvery web structures that you see growing around them, that's actually mycorrhizal fungi. And crawling on those fungi are this little springtail, and the springtail is eating the fungi. Okay. Now, if you look at the soil particles, though, in this picture, you'll see that the particles have been clumped together and they have these hyphae growing through them. And so you can just see here how these fungi are holding the soil in place and preventing erosion. They can also decontaminate soil. So Karen was talking about nutrient pollution being washed into the bay. If people add extra fertilizers to their lawns, that goes into the bay, it creates that green scum-like material. Well, these fungi can pull those extra nutrients right out of the soil so that they never make it into the bay. All right. They can also pull out heavy metals, so like lead or mercury. We don't know why they do that. They'll actively seek out the lead and mercury and actively pull it into their hyphae. We think they might confuse it with something else. Now, in the process, they end up decontaminating the soil, and they do it for free. So if we were going to try to pull lead and mercury out of the soil using our own techniques, it would be incredibly costly. But by using these fungi, it is relatively cheap. And especially if the fungi pass those materials onto the plant, then we can always harvest the plants. And people will even smelt the plants to get those heavy metals back out, and they can actually make money. Okay, and then of course, mycorrhizal fungi are critical for healthy plants. I already mentioned that they help basically fertilize these plants naturally. Okay. And generally, plants do a lot better when they have mycorrhizal fungi on them. Okay. And our local conservation groups have actually been using mycorrhizal fungi in their restoration projects. And this is Irvine Ranch Conservancy in one of the areas they manage. And they use a technique that they call fairy dust. So what they'll do is they'll collect soil from nearby intact, like healthy native ecosystems. They'll collect some of the topsoil from that, and those will have the native mycorrhizal fungi in it. And then when they're restoring a degraded ecosystem on their land, they'll sprinkle some of that soil, which they call the fairy dust, into their project. And those mycorrhizal fungi will grow, and they'll help the native plants grow that they're trying to get started. Now, my lab has done a survey of this technique, and how it's been used in different restoration projects around the world. And we found, in general, this is actually a very effective technique. When people add this fairy dust to their restoration projects, the plants do better, coming in about 25% better, actually. And again, it's cheap. You just have to go to a nearby ecosystem for the topsoil. Now, we have an important cautionary tale that we learned from this, and that is if you buy mycorrhizal fungi commercially, it doesn't work. And in fact, it can actually reduce the growth of the native plants that people are restoring. I don't know if you ever see, if you garden or anything like that, sometimes you can go to the nursery and you'll see bags of soil that say contains mycorrhizal fungi. Those don't help, right? They're not native mycorrhizal fungi. They're not native to the area that we're trying to plant. And so those fungi just don't work as well in those areas, and they don't work as well with the plants that we're trying to grow there. So it does help to restore the mycorrhizal fungi, but we need to have the right ones. Okay, now, in terms of what we're doing in our lab with the Newport Bay project, as David mentioned, we are trying to help restore this ecosystem after the Brazilian pepper tree is removed. Now, the Brazilian pepper tree, it creates a lot of basically toxic compounds in their roots and their leaves. And those toxic compounds may alter the mycorrhizal fungi in the soil in this area we're trying to restore. And so one of the things that David is doing, he's going to be one of the people leading you on this tour, is he's getting to the root of the problem here. He's doing sampling of the soil in this degraded, invaded habitat along Newport Back Bay. And he's going to see if the mycorrhizal fungi have actually been altered by the Brazilian pepper tree. And if so, can we put in those correct native mycorrhizal fungi to help the native plants grow after they're being planted again? All right. And that is it for my presentation. I've given you some of the basics of why we care about soil and what we know about managing it to improve our restoration practices. And I think we're ready now to go to our next speaker.
Hello, Elisa Reyes here again. So Heather Cieslak, our operations director, is kind of manning our PowerPoints back at her home office, so we're gonna wait till she pulls that up. Oh, there it is. Okay, so just to orient you guys very quickly on our location, I think you can go to the next slide, Heather. That one. So we are located in Newport Beach, as you might imagine, and Big Canyon Park is located in between Jamboree and Back Bay Drive, just north of San Joaquin Hills Road. So if you're familiar with that area, that's kind of where we're at. We are on Gabrielino Band of Mission Indian territory, and they have been involved with the project from every phase. They help ensure that we're being respectful of any artifacts, or as we're moving dirt, that we're being respectful. And so they are very supportive of the project. And I just wanted to orient you to that location. So our project is broken up into, some might call it 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2, or 4 phases, or phase 2 is broken down into 3. So as you see on the map, phase 1 has already undergone construction, and it's in the monitoring and maintenance phase at the moment. And so that one was a bit of creek and riparian habitat restoration. We constructed a stormwater treatment bioretention cell, and we diverted dry weather flows, made some culvert improvements, and redid the trails. So if you haven't been on the new trails, you should go check them out. And then moving on to phase 2, why we're here. So phase 2 is starting this fall, and it is a huge undergoing of removing, as we've mentioned a few times, the Brazilian pepper tree. And so our goals are to restore riparian habitat, and in removing these non-native invasive species, we will replace them with native sustainable habitat. And this part of the project is about 11.3 acres, whereas phase 1 was 9 acres. And so we're also going to work to stabilize the creek and the floodplain, and we're enhancing public access and providing education opportunities in the Big Canyon Nature Park. Maybe next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna pass it over to David to talk a little bit more about the fungi on the pepper trees.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, can everyone hear me? I hope so. So this is David again, and here's a actual picture of the root of the Brazilian pepper tree. So if you look at the center of your screen, you have various structures, and if you see sort of like the vessels kind of that are darker, those are the mycelia. And we also have intracellular and extracellular, which that means is the mushroom or fungi grows in and outside of the root. And inside, if you see like sort of these larger dots, those are called vesicles. And those actually store resources like nitrogen and phosphorus. And those actually get exchanged in with the root directly. So if you ever go to your yard or any kind of garden and pull up the roots and you take a good look at it, inside of all those roots, which is like 80% of all plants on earth, use some type of mycorrhizal fungi. So that's the Brazilian pepper tree. And you'll know it's a Brazilian pepper tree because it's red. And so if you go to the next Coyote brush slide, it's a lot like a brighter color here for the Coyote brush. But here you can see that the Coyote brush has these really nice blue lines. And those are the actual mycelium coming outside from the soil and all the different areas around the root zone, and then actually coming into the intercellular walls of the root. And if you see those blue balloons, those are the vesicles. So this Coyote brush is doing really well. And what this shows is that there's a lot of evidence of nutrient exchange. So the more vesicles and other structures that you see, other than the mycelium, you have a good sign that these plants are doing what they're supposed to, and they're exchanging nutrients as they are. So this is a very beautiful picture, and this was taken by Marissa Mitchell, who is a lab intern this summer. So we're really proud of to have her to help us with the pictures. And here's Elise.
All right, next slide. So you might ask what we're replacing these invasive species like the pepper tree with. So we are in a riparian area, and a big part of this project is to provide habitat for the federally endangered leaf spells vireo. I think we have a little photo of that guy somewhere in the PowerPoint. So they are endangered due to loss of riparian habitat, as well as a mixture of cowbird brood parasitation. If I said that wrong, I'm sorry. And so they like dense riparian habitat. So a lot of cottonwoods, some willows. They like areas that are abundant with insects and spiders, and they do nest and breed forage in these areas as well. So I think Heather, you can go to the next slide, maybe. Okay, there. So there's a couple very pretty photos of your leaf spells Vera on the left there, and then some of the cottonwoods and the sycamores, as well as like mule fat that will be put in place of these pepper trees. And then I think that David's gonna kind of highlight this pepper tree we're talking about and show you in real life if our Wi-Fi is letting us an actual pepper tree and kind of go over characteristics of it. All right, give us 1 second here.
And then
Okay,
just
the video, oh, go ahead, Heather.
just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have questions, you can go ahead and send them in the panelists or raise your hand, and we'll get to those at the very end.
Yes, great reminder. Thank you. Let's see. Can you guys see David? Give a hello. There you go.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Perfect.
All right, good. Okay, so I know Kathleen mentioned earlier that the Brazilian pepper tree has a lot of chemical properties that would allow it to alter mycorrhizal fungi. And that looks like these red berries. And it's called a false pepper. So if you do want to grind this up on your next meal, you can. And it's actually the mixed pepper at Trader Joe's, has Brazilian pepper. So if you do want to get culinary, they also make a good wine. But if you can see behind under this understory, there's not a lot of diversity. So typically with a native forest that we have here, you'll have several different type of willows, you'll have elderberry, you'll have coyote brush, you'll have wildflowers, but under here you just see leaf litter. And that's because this Brazilian pepper tree is able to outcompete everybody. And you can even see this is our native coyote brush here. And you can see how thin, and it's really because it doesn't get enough light. So when these things come together next to each other, the Brazilian pepper tree also thrives off of urban runoff. So if you have a situation where excess nitrogen or fertilizers are coming off from the stream or just from rain events, the Brazilian pepper tree likes those extra nutrients and it grows really well with them. But our native plants, they're not really adapted evolutionary to have an excess of fertilizers and nutrients. So one of the things is that these plants don't do as well. So we have to get rid of these pepper trees to allow for the native forest to recover. And another thing too, we're also doing with plants that we're gonna be restoring, so a coyote brush, which we're gonna be getting from Tree of Life Nursery, which is in Orange County. They actually have their own mycorrhizal mix that they've developed over decades, and it's proprietary. So, you know, we won't be able to share that with you. But any plant that you get from Tree of Life Nursery, they do actually provide mycorrhiza in their potting mix. And so rest assured, you'll be able to get mycorrhiza added to your area. But one of the most important things is really just about adding the right plants back. So once you put in the coyote brush and the native species again, you'll be able to restore the native habitat. So there's a plane going by, so we'll let it go by.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is pretty much, and then one other thing about the pepper tree that I wanted to share was that it's rhizonomous. So if you're able to come in with your Paul Bunyan axe or any kind of tree removing equipment, the tree will grow back as soon as you cut it down. So without putting, without herbicides or any really aggressive treatment, you really can't get rid of this tree. And here on the Big Canyon project, we're actually removing the root balls. So we're actually going to avoid using herbicide in some of the more sensitive areas. So I think that's one way that we're really trying to restore the environment and also mitigate all of our other actions as we're doing the project. But this is the Brazilian pepper tree, and we'd love to take any of your questions at this point. So we're kind of gonna turn the screen off and then show you some other images, but feel free to send your questions in through chat or raise your hand and we'll get to those as soon as we can.
Yeah, and as we mentioned, Heather is our kind of moderator back at her home office, so hopefully she can help with questions.
Absolutely, we'll do that. And then I did see people were raising their hands. That is a feature in here. So if you do have a question and want to raise your hand, we can absolutely do that. So I did have, and then what happens is then I will allow you to talk and then we'll go from there. So let's see, do we have a raising of any hands? No one, come on, don't be shy. We're a nice small group of 100 participants here. Just kidding. No one. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Oh, we got some hands. Good. Okay, Trang Nugent, I'm going to hit allow to talk. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I was wondering, you said you guys gonna eliminate the Brazilian tree. What do you guys do with it? Do you guys just throw it away or?
Absolutely.
Hello?
And I don't know what.
Okay.
Lisa, are you going to field that question?
I think I can field the question as best as possible. So the idea is that, so we are also screening plants for shot hole borer. If it does not have any shot hole borer, the plant will be removed off-site, chipped. Hopefully we're trying to limit the amount of dumping we take to a landfill because it's, not as cost effective. So it'd be a mixture of like on-site disposal and removing it off-site.
All right, perfect. And I'll take a question from John and Melissa. I just go ahead and unmute yourself and say hi.
Hi. I heard a story about the Brazilian pepper tree. Someone removed it and had to drag it quite a distance. And a year later, they had a row of pepper trees sprouting up where all the little, I guess, berries or whatever fell off. So do you have to be extra careful removing the pepper trees?
Yeah, it's a great question, and also maybe part of the reason why it does so well. This plant was brought in, I can stand corrected if I'm incorrect here, but my understanding is that came in originally, they think, into Florida in the mid-1800s, and it was used because of the red berries. It kind of looks like ornamental for Christmas time, so it was kind of overused, and it's very popular in our landscaping. So a lot of HOAs in this area even plant this because it's very shady, it grows very well. So yes, we do have to be very careful about how we remove this, and we're trying to limit obviously seed dispersal so that we don't have this continuous problem. But yeah, so I believe that story that you get a row of pepper trees by dragging it. They do very well in certain areas. Hopefully that answered your question.
And then go ahead, I'm going to take one from the chat feature too. You can absolutely, instead of raising your hand feature, you can also write something in the chat. So just wanted to ask, historically, how did the pepper tree get started in the upper Newport Bay? And that is from Dr. Chuck Nichols.
Okay, so I think it's another kind of bouncing off what we just spoke. A lot of maybe landscaping is using it, and so it kind of goes, the seeds will spread through our waterways and find a nice, comfortable, for lack of a better word, place to start growing where, there's the right temperature and soil moisture and sunlight, and so they do tend to take over open areas.
All right, and then I also have Sherry Marger, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself if you haven't already, and if you have a question or comment, you can absolutely go for it.
Yeah, I was just curious, were there any Brazilian pepper trees in the first phase, and have they been, if there were they successfully removed and have not come back?
The answer is yes, they have been removed, and if you keep watch on them, either with, you could do like multiple types of treatments. So you could do root removal, you could do like a kind of a grinding basil treatment type thing, and they successfully have been treated and removed and not grown back in other restoration projects.
Okay, thanks.
So I guess a mix of mechanical and manual aggressive treatments kind of takes care of the Brazilian pepper tree.
And then I have a question from Susan Jarrett. So the mitochondria are good and successful in some plants, but why not Brazilian pepper? And then what is wrong with the fungi in the Brazilian pepper? So maybe David can, at least you can turn this over to David and he can expand on that one a little bit.
Yeah, for the mycorrhiza, they're not doing anything wrong, and the fungi, they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. And what happens is when you have plants that don't have evolutionary history with each other, So like if you have California before European contact, it doesn't have a lot of the invasive plants that we have. So when you bring in a novel plant and say the Brazilian pepper, it has these in the leaves as well as the berries, they have antibacterial properties and antifungal properties. So when the leaf litter and the berries decompose on the floor, those chemicals, which are called monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, they are absorbed by the mycorrhiza, and only certain types of mycorrhiza or species of mycorrhiza like all those chemicals. So it's not that the mycorrhiza do anything bad, it's just that the Brazilian pepper tree is likely more able to manipulate what type of microbes it has. And then once you get rid of the Brazilian pepper tree, there's a thing that happens also in Florida and Hawaii. It's called the Brazilian pepper tree legacy effect. And even when you cut the trees down, it'll be hard for plants to recover there. And that's because of the microbes. And so it's not that the fungi or the bacteria do anything bad. It's just that they're heavily influenced by the plant chemicals of the Brazilian pepper tree, whereas our native coastal sagebrush and other plants, they don't have the same type of life strategies. So that's something we're still trying to find out. But more of the lines is that the Brazilian pepper tree has a lot more chemical things that you call novel weapons to use when it comes here. So I hope that answers it.
That does, very clear is what Susan is saying. And then we also have Elisa saying, hi, Newport. She was wondering, will removing many invasive species like Brazilian pepper trees have an impact on climate change?
Yeah, I could field that.
Go for it.
So I could go for hours on this, actually. So I'll just pick one way that it could affect climate change, and it can actually help us fight climate change if we remove the Brazilian pepper tree. And that is because the Brazilian pepper tree has really, really dark leaves. And you wouldn't think that this would be important, but you know, maybe if you're like me and you're wearing a dark shirt out in the sun on a hot day, you get pretty hot, and you don't get as hot as if you're wearing like a white shirt. And that's just because dark colors absorb more of that sunlight and convert it into heat. And so the Brazilian pepper tree, because it's also dark, tends to absorb more of that sunlight and then convert it into heat. And then that way it actually contributes to the heating of the surface where it grows. Now, if you contrast that with the native shrubs like the coastal sage scrub and all that, like the pictures that you saw, those shrubs have pretty light green leaves. And so they reflect a lot of that sunlight off and they stay relatively cooler. And so if you remove like the Brazilian pepper tree over large areas, it can actually have an effect. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Oh, that is so cool is what she's saying. Thank you. It sounds like a common, it seems like common sense, but absolutely it makes such a big difference when we talk about why it's so important for native species instead of invasive, because they naturally have these properties that help us. So that's wonderful. I think, oh, we have one more, I think, from John and Melissa. I will go ahead and unmute again. Did you have something else that you wanted to say?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, mustard seed also, I believe, toxifies the soil around where it's growing. Is the process similar to what happens with the Brazilian pepper tree?
And I think Kathleen's going to field that one.
I can feel that. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Actually, one of my former PhD students, Mia Maltz, did a whole dissertation on this. And yes, you are correct. That black mustard that you see, you know, when you're driving along the hills in this area and kind of in late spring, you'll see the hills, they're covered with these yellow flowers. Well, that's this black mustard plant, and it's actually invasive. It's highly invasive. And one of the reasons it does well is, like the Brazilian pepper tree, it releases these sort of toxic compounds. And in that case, we know, because we studied it, they kill off almost all the native mycorrhizal fungi in that soil. And those plants they're one of the few species that don't actually have a relationship with mycorrhizal fungi. So they kill off all the mycorrhizal fungi the native species need. They're fine, they grow well. And again, once you remove that black mustard, you have this legacy effect where you still have all those toxic compounds in the soil. So we have to deal with that too.
Get rid of the soil.
Wow.
All right, I think that's all of our questions. Anybody else in the chat and or the raising your hand feature? No, okay. I think David is gonna go live again. We'll let him do that.
We're just both going to go live. So we just want, if there's no more questions, we just wanted to thank you for your time for joining us. The phase 2 part of the project will start this fall. So we invite you to come back and visit it probably in the winter or early next year. And the trails will be open. So if you want to see how that unfolds, you can poke into Big Canyon or just come visit the bay because it's a really super cool place. So just want to say thank you. If you want any last words.
Yeah, and if you want more information on the project, or you want to get involved, or you want to help us in some aspect, you can email us at info@newportbay.org.
Yes, perfect. And if you want more information about the work that you're doing in your lab, where can they go visit?
You can email treseder@uci.edu, or you can look up UCI faculty website, Kathleen Treseder. And also make sure to check out Karen McLaughlin. She's also on Twitter. You can check out her work too as well.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day. Stay cool.
Bye. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, everyone. We look forward to doing more of these in the future.
Bye.